Okay, I am back with another political talk video, and this is one that has an interesting story behind it, to say the least. So, as some of you may remember, 4 years ago, I made a couple of presidential election prediction videos where I showed maps of basically how I thought the elections were going to go between President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden, now President Joe Biden. So I decided I wanted to do that again for the upcoming 2024 presidential election. But some things have changed in the last month. So, real quick, if you watch my channel, you might have noticed recently, the most recent video I uploaded were some videos from my family trip to Colorado Springs that we did back in July. And originally I was going to do this video right when we got back from the Colorado Springs trip. But a couple things happened. So right before our trip, we had the first presidential debate between President Biden and former President Trump. And while Trump lied throughout pretty much the entire debate, Biden appeared weak, and a lot of people say that, yeah, he lost the debate just because he could not talk very well, and he just gave off some pretty awkward facial expressions. And there were growing calls after the debate for President Biden to resign. And originally, I think back in 2020, Biden had said he was originally just going to be a one-term president. But since Trump decided to run again, he probably thought, well, I beat Trump last time, I'll beat him again this time. But since he did so bad in that debate, a lot of Democratic politicians, Pelosi, Schumer, Democratic governors across the country were saying, Biden, you have to drop out. It could cost not just the Democrats the presidency, but Democrats nationwide their elections. Then the RNC happened while we were on our family trip to Colorado Springs. And we saw some of it while we were there. Trump ultimately picked J.D. Vance, a first-term senator, and not even a full first-term senator from Ohio, as his VP pick. Now, originally he was going to go with, I think it was North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, but ultimately he was told by both some family and some friends at Fox News, you should go with Vance. He'll help you out with younger voters and help, I guess, rile up the base against Biden. Which, at the moment, seemed like a pretty good plan. But then, while we were still on our trip, Joe Biden announced he is not going to run for a second term after all. He's just going to finish off the last 6 months of this presidential term. Harris basically became the presumptive nominee, and just a few days ago, like not even a full week ago at this point, she picked Minnesota Governor... Sorry, one of the cats is scratching at my door. Picked Minnesota Governor Walz as her VP. Now, I should note, just personal note, initially I would have preferred if she had picked either Governor Whitmer of Michigan or Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania as her VP pick, because Minnesota is arguably the bluest state in the country. The last time Minnesota went to a Republican for president was Richard Nixon's re-election in 1972. So Minnesota has not gone for the Republican nominee in 50 years. And she really wants to get in here. Sorry, that's going to be a distraction. When I get a break, I'll figure out what she's doing. Anyway, but ultimately she picked Walz, and in the last couple of weeks, Donald Trump, as well as J.D. Vance's poll numbers have dropped, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz's numbers have gone up. But we are still a little under 3 months out from the presidential election. At the day I'm recording this, it's August 13th. I think the election is... whatever that day in Tuesday, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November is, so less than 3 months. So when I got back from my trip, and after everything that's happened over the last few weeks, I decided to do another one of those election prediction map videos. So here's what I did. I looked at all the polls from within the last few weeks, because as a rule, personally, I don't really pay attention to presidential polls, at least in my lifetime, since I've really started following politics when I was in high school, until 3 to 4 months out for the presidential election. Because again, we're less than 3 months out, but not even a month ago, it looked like it was going to be a rematch between Biden and Trump, with Trump probably winning in a landslide because of how bad Biden did in the debate. But like I said, I've looked at polls from the last few weeks, and I basically made an election prediction map based on where the polls are currently and where I think looks like they're going over the next probably week or two. And I'm going to call this one my weather map. I'll explain more later. But then I also made a second presidential election prediction map. And this one I'm going to call the climate map. So weather change versus climate change. Weather is basically what the temperature is right now. Climate, when you compare weather over a period of time. So for any right-winger out there who doesn't know the difference, hey, not really 100% related, but there you go, another lesson there. Anyway, but the reason why I'm calling the second one the climate map is I compared the current polls with the results of the previous 5 presidential elections, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016, and 2020. And like I said, I'll get back to both of those later. So right now I'm going to talk about my first map, my weather map, which is where, based on current polls, where I think the election's going to results are going to be in 3 months. Okay, so my first presidential election prediction map. So, as I said in the introduction, what I did was I've looked at various polls over the last few weeks since the RNC happened, and for the record, DNC is going to happen next week, but I don't really expect too much of a change one way or another from now until the DNC, which is part of the reason why I wanted to originally make this video right after the RNC, but then obviously things happened since then. So I looked at current polls, particularly for 8 key swing states, and then I basically said, okay, using the pathway to 270, 538 election maps, and then looking at a whole bunch of different websites, a bunch of different videos on YouTube of various podcasters, CNN, and a few other channels as well, I basically just created my map. So I will also point this out. Looking at polls since the RNC, as I said, Trump and Vance's approval have gone down, so much so that Vance, from what I've read, is the least popular VP pick for a president since the 80s. Like, not only was he not very popular in Ohio to begin with, because he's the first-term Ohio senator, his approval's actually gone down since Trump picked him to be the VP because he said a few controversial things. Trump continued to say controversial things. Meanwhile, Harris, her approval since she became the presumptive nominee has gone up. And like I said, she recently picked Walz, who fairly popular Democrat, arguably one of the most progressive Democratic governors in the country. So not really too much change for him, but like I said, Harris's approval's gone up. So looking at the polls and the approval ratings, this is the map I made as I'm calling my weather map. So currently basically, hold on, I'm trying to get it close. Yes, I still do paper maps. I don't have the budget or equipment to actually try to speak on one screen or digitally edit in. So this is where I currently think, if the election were held today, 3 months out, based on all current polls, where I think it would be. So it's a little hard to tell looking at the map. Let me get to this side. So yeah, this is currently where I think it stands. If the election were held today, Harris would win 26 states and Washington, D.C., totaling 319 electoral votes, which, put in perspective, that's almost what Obama had won when he got reelected in 2012 against Mitt Romney. So pretty similar numbers there. Well over 300 electoral votes, which for a Democrat, especially if you're going up against someone like Trump, you got to make sure you're definitely out of the margin of error, because I think there's an expression for Democrats to win the popular vote, or win the Electoral College, they got to win the popular vote by at least, I think, 3 to 5%. And so this would definitely be a good enough margin of error, or out of the margin of error, to safely say, yeah, Harris won easily. Now, she would win basically all the 7 key swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. She'd also win the one electoral vote district from Nebraska. Trump, with this current polls, based on current polls with this map, he would win 24 states, but he only totals 219 electoral votes. The only swing states, and I do that with like that, is because if you can even call them swing states anymore, they're pretty much comfortably read at this point that he would win, would be Florida, which is the state he now claims residency in, and Ohio, which is the state where J.D. Vance is from. And he would also win the one district congressional electoral college vote from Maine. So again, Harris wins 26 states, D.C., 319 electoral votes, to Trump's 24 states, but 219 electoral votes. So we're talking a 100 electoral vote difference here, which is surprising considering she only wins by just 26 states. I'm going to go and put this down now. And like I said, the reason why I call this my weather map is because I'm just going by what, based on just current polls, 3 months out from the presidential election, if it were held today, this is how I think it would go. And sure, a handful of these swing states, particularly Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia, are very close in the margin of error. So anything could happen the next few months. Harris could do very bad at the presidential debate between her and Trump, and then she could lose her lead in all these states. But at the same time, Trump's approval could go down even more, and then he could actually end up being out of the margin of error for some of these swing states, and then Harris wins them easily. But this is, like I said, if I honestly think if the election were held today, this is how I think it would go. Nice, comfortable win for Kamala Harris against Donald Trump. But like I said at the beginning of the video, I made a second map, which I'm going to call my climate map, and where I think, looking at current trends with the past 5 elections, it would actually be a lot closer to a pretty shocking degree. Okay, so now I have my second presidential election prediction map. So, as I said a minute ago, my second map is still based on current polls, but I also compare all the polls and where I currently think, if the election were held today, where it would go, with the election results of the last 5 presidential elections. Bush's re-election in 2004, Obama's election in 2008, then his re-election in 2012, Trump's election in 2016, and then Biden's election in 2020. So here's the rule I made with this second map. If a state was won by a specific political party, whether it be Republican or Democrat, all 5 times, or 4 of the 5 times, I just said it will likely go to any generic Republican or any generic Democrat in 2024, regardless of who the candidate was. Now, if a Democrat or Republican won the state just 3 times, then I had to really look, what 3 times did they win, and where does it currently compare with the results now? So, for example, if a state went to the Republican in 04, 08, and 12, but then Hillary won in 16, Biden won in 20, and it currently has Harris in the lead, then for the second map, I said the Democrat would win it this time. So that was basically looking long-term over the last basically 24 years, comparing every state with how I think it could potentially go this time. And that gave me my climate map, which is this. Zoom in. Yeah. So right off the bat, you can tell a lot more red because there's 5 key state changes. Let me once again kind of get over. So here you can see there are 3 swing states that originally I said were going to go to Kamala Harris. Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina now go to Trump. Because while currently Harris is polling in the lead, or at the very least within the margin of error there, overall those 3 states, majority of the last 5 elections prior to this one, went to a Republican. So I went ahead and put him back in the Republican camp because, yes, Harris could win them, but if something goes wrong and Trump gets back in the lead in the next 3 months, he could win those states in 2020 in November. Meanwhile, the 1 congressional district in Maine that I said Trump could win goes back to Harris, and the 1 congressional district in Nebraska that I said that Harris could win goes back to Trump. Since, again, sometimes those states will split their votes, but overall, I think, looking at the past 5 elections, the states as a whole would go Maine for Harris and Nebraska for Trump. So now, Trump has a majority of states. He would get 27 states. But, and this is the caveat here, even with getting 27 states, he only gets 262 electoral votes. So even when winning some of the swing states away from Harris, based on the last 5 elections and current polling, he would still lose the Electoral College to Harris. Because Harris would not only get 23 states in D.C., but even with losing Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, she still wins with 276 electoral votes. Literally the only way, I'm going to go and move it back a little. Literally the only way now, if this were to happen, where Trump could win, would be for him to win back one of the 3 states he had won in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, but he then lost those 3 states to Biden in 2020. So even with losing 3 states, he'd have to win back a 4th state that he had originally had won in 2016 in order to beat Harris in 2024. And even then, in 2016, you could argue he didn't actually win those 3 states. Hillary Clinton lost those 3 states because all 3 of those were within the margin of error. So yeah, looking at both current trends and the previous 5 elections, if I were to just kind of say, okay, overall, where the states have gone, basically within my teenage years, college years, and young adulthood, Harris still wins. Not as safe of a majority, but if they were to result in this map, Harris still wins. She'd win with fewer states, but she'd still win a majority of the votes by just a handful, because you need 270 to win, and like I said, with this map, she would win 276. So, yeah. So, yeah, it would be interesting to see where it goes, but at the moment, Harris looks like she'd win either way. Okay, so in conclusion, we're still a little under 3 months out until the 2024 presidential election, and anything can and will happen. I mean, in 2020, Trump got COVID in October. Heard him campaigning for a while, and on top of everything else he did wrong with COVID, the messaging helped Biden win in 2020. Well, a month ago, it looked like it was going to be Trump winning against Biden in a landslide, but then Trump picks a very unpopular man to be his VP pick. Then Biden said he's not going to run again, and now it looks like Harris is gaining so much popularity, because a lot of people might have forgotten in the last few years, Harris had gotten a lot of attacks to the point where she was not a very popular vice president. But now she's doing very active campaigning. She picked a very popular governor to be her VP pick. And so now she's doing very well on the campaign trail, whereas Trump is struggling to do the rallies again. And I guess just a lot of people are tired of his message that he's just been repeating for over a decade at this point. Or, well, almost a decade at this point, actually, since he first announced in 2015 he was running. But yeah, looking at both current polling and popularity trends, and as well as comparing it with the previous 5 presidential election, I can't say with 100% 3 months out, Kamala Harris is going to win. I'm not saying that. But I can say I'm 75% sure that 3 months from now, Harris is going to beat Donald Trump when the election comes in November. But even with that, I'm not saying Democrats, we need to be complacent. Just because I'm just an average YouTuber who follows politics says, oh yeah, I think Harris is going to win. Democrats across the country still need to get out there and vote, but not just for president. We need to vote for the House, the Senate, and governors across the country when they're up for re-election in this November. Because keep in mind, the Republicans have just a single-digit seat majority in the House. So if the Democrats can pick up just a handful of seats, Hakeem Jeffries, I believe, will be the next Speaker of the House. In the Senate, I think currently, if you include the independents who caucus with the Democrats, I think there's 51 Democrats. And there's quite a few Democrats in the Senate up for re-election in swing states this year. So it'd be one thing for Harris to win that swing state, but then the Democratic senator to lose in that swing state, because then the Democrats lose the Senate. And if something were to happen to either Thomas and or Alito, then Harris would get the chance to put someone on the Supreme Court, but if she doesn't have the Senate, it would be hard to put someone who's very liberal or even progressive on the Supreme Court, since Biden really only had one person to put on the Supreme Court. And then, of course, the governors. I'm from a solid red state. No Democrat has won statewide office in Texas since 1992, and we have not had a Democrat win our state in the presidential election since Jimmy Carter. So when my parents were kids. So my state, we're in no real, danger of having a Democrat take a statewide office. And as much as I don't like Ted Cruz, he's probably going to win re-election. I may have said this in a previous video. I think Beto O'Rourke had a better chance last time to beat Cruz than Colin Allred does this time against Ted Cruz. But there are plenty of swing states and even a few blue states where they need to re-elect or even elect the Democratic governors running for election this year. Because it's one thing to have the presidency, but the Democrats need to maintain the Senate, retake the House, and there are a few states where the governors need to remain or get in power to truly help Kamala Harris enact a really liberal, if not even progressive agenda over the next 4 years. Because even if she does beat Trump, there's only so much the president can do on their own without their party giving them support. Alright, well that's all I got for this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment if you can. And hopefully I'll get back to you with some more content in the near future. Alright, have a good day. Take care.